Between Life and Death by Jaclyn. Chapter 37. Apart from the sound of horses' hooves thudding against freshly frosted ground, the world was quiet. Even the natural wind had toned down, as if it too were operating on bated breath. Riker, Harper, Lyra, Soren, and I rode through the rolling hills, the gentle curves of the land flattening like an outstretched palm the closer we got to the barracks. The landscape was dotted with massive boulders, smooth and worn, as if the bison that once roamed these lands had polished them with their backs. I determined that life did indeed have a strange sense of humor. Caleb, who I had felt so incredibly far from, had never been far at all. The men conscripted from Maristone were stationed at the training barracks a short ride west of Clearwell Castle. They were among a large group that would be trained, given piss-poor armor, and dull swords, and shipped off to the cursed lands to their deaths. Their blood would stain the hands of the cursed, while the king's remained unmarred and clean. Not that I could say the same thing about his soul, although I doubted he had one. After our meeting, Vaughn and Riker had traveled to the training camp to do some early espionage. That was 2 days ago. Riker returned yesterday, while Vaughn stayed behind. Why he decided to stay behind was beyond me. According to Riker, it took less than a 3-hour ride to get there. But as we rode towards the training camp, for me, it felt much longer than that. Everything I had done over the past weeks, all of it was for this moment. I was not leaving without my brother. A grove of dense trees stood before us, their barren branches lulled to sleep by winter's sudden approach. The towering trees, the forest, they reminded me of home. I inhaled deeply, my lungs yearning for more. When the rolling landscape was half a mile behind us, we tied our horses to the trees and walked the remainder on foot, the gentle nickering of our horses disappearing as we traveled farther north into the dense bush. We walked in silence, all of us on high alert. We were in the chokehold of the enemy, and we all knew it. Riker led the group, Soren following closely behind, with Harper and Lyra bringing up the rear. I was a few paces behind them, my sleep-deprived body dragging me down more than I cared to admit. Something flashed behind me. I grabbed my knife and turned to swing. Little goddess, Vaughn purred in my ear, his hand cuffing my wrist, stopping my arm mid-swing. He wore a long black cloak, the hood pulled up, casting his face in shadow. Vaughn, I said by way of greeting, my tongue at a loss for words. Damn him and his devilishly handsome face. Were you hoping it would be someone else? He teased. His eyes were still tinged with green, but not nearly as vivid as before. I yearned to see the intense, satisfying color return. Those lush lips of his turned into that signature, lazy, unperplexed grin, like he knew what I was thinking. He removed his ringed fingers from my wrist, arm disappearing under the black veil of his cloak. As he walked over to Riker, he called out over his broad shoulder, his cape flowing behind him. Carried on his wind, "Come, little minx." I blew out a breath, my lips vibrating as I scuttled behind him, those impossibly long legs of his covering ground much quicker than mine. After a brief exchange of words, and a rehashing of the plan, we followed Vaughn and Riker as they led us forward. The land descended into a steep valley, a slender river vein snaking through the middle. It was a far cry from the water that once would have run through here. Carving out the valley, nestled in the belly of the valley, beside the river, was a barricaded camp, the Arundel training barracks. Lookout towers stood at the 4 corners of the camp, keeping a watchful eye over the surrounding grounds. I didn't doubt they were fully equipped with archers, their bows held at the ready. My eyes traced the oval-shaped perimeter, the outer wall taller than a 2-story house, tall enough that no one could get in and no one could get out. It was made of pine trunks, their tops carved into spikes and their bottoms buried deep within the ground. They were strapped together with thick rope that looked to be made of hemp, although it was worn and aged and hard to tell. Slumbering crimson banners were hung evenly around the perimeter, placed every 10 feet or so. Inside, there had to be close to 100 tents, if not more. On the right-hand side of the camp, placed in neat, organized rows, smaller tents made up the majority. Larger, extravagant tents were sectioned on the left side. I counted 10 in total. Stretching down the middle was a sandy area lined with weapon racks, some wooden and some made of metal. One section consisted of long laneways and bullseye targets, used for training archers. Beside it were rows of cloth dummies, stuffed with straw and set on a rotating pole. There were 2 guarded entrances into the camp. One was on the side of the larger tents, and the other one was located on the opposite side from us, the side that faced the direction one would travel to go to Clearwell Castle. I recalled this bit of information from studying one of Lyra's hand-drawn maps. I wondered how many times the king had traveled that road. I doubted his pompous, as cared to do so, although I imagined his advisor had. I clenched my fists. All right, you filthy rebels, any last words? Riker said with a smirk, hands slinging off his cloak, revealing his carefully honed, heavily muscled body beneath, wrapped in fighting leathers and adorned with a multitude of weaponry. I counted 6 weapons, but I bet he had more. I don't think so, Soren said, feigning courage, although his droopy posture suggested otherwise. As soon as the thought occurred, Soren quickly straightened his shoulders, his gaze darting to me. Out! I hissed. Sorry. His shadow mouse returned too. It's whole. Great divine and lord of light on a sun day. That was getting old. Harper and Lyra stepped off to the side. Harper whispered something to her. Lyra's eyes were wide. She looked horrified, like she was on the verge of a breakdown. You should have stayed back at the manor. Harper's voice was no longer a whisper, worry written plainly in her doting gaze, her hands gently rubbing Lyra's arms comfortingly. Lyra trembled, her knees wobbling. Harper took her in her arms, her hand rhythmically stroking Lyra's hair. Lyra clutched onto her as if her very life depended on it, as if some horrible monster were lapping at her, threatening to drag her away. It's going to be okay, Harper reassured her as she gently tipped Lyra's chin up, and sealed her promise with a kiss. Under the light of the moon, they looked like a painted picture, sealed in one another's embrace. Riker strolled to his sister's side. Rock, paper, scissors? She smirked, a visibly much calmer Lyra still held in her arms. You're on. Harper's face was cast in a honey-soft glow as she knocked her arrow against the string of her bow. Her curved bow and arrow were both crafted of flame, simple and elegant, a testament to her craftsmanship. She kept the flame dull purposefully, so our location was not exposed. Elbow straight, her fingers drew the taut string back. The limbs flexed as the tension increased, and when she released the arrow, they vibrated with a sigh of relief. She didn't lower her bow, her gaze transfixed on her arrow as it launched into the night, soaring over the wooden barracks and embedding itself in one of the cloth tents. Her lips curled in triumph. Bullseye. Lyra leapt up and down, sharing in Harper's victory. A gentle breeze brushed my cheek, caressing the ends of my hair before it tugged reluctantly away. Seconds later, Harper's flame arrow burst into a monstrous, hungry flame, eagerly lapping at whatever it could taste, whatever it could burn. The fire leapt to another tent as if it had a mind of its own, but I knew by the scent of his magic, the will of his power, it was all Vaughn. He did it all without moving a muscle. The tents continued to catch fire, the flames jumping from one to the next, doubling in size by the second, until the air above was tinged with a smoky orange glow. Men staggered out, screaming and shouting, alerting the others, telling them to get up. As the flames multiplied, so did the men. I was amazed how many poured out of one tent, wondered how they all fit in there. There would not be enough room for all of them to lie down. The training grounds buzzed with chaos, like a jar of upturned, shaken ants scrambling over one another, uncertain what to do next. My eyes darted back and forth, trying to find Caleb, but none of the men were him. I tilted my face to the starry sky, a prayer on my breath. Please, Lady Light, let me find him. One man grabbed as many buckets as he could carry. He shoved them into the hands of the others, rallying them to fill them with water from the well, to put out the flames. My heart struck with such force it nearly fractured my chest in two. I knew that unyielding determination. Caleb, I screamed. I didn't think just moved. I ran. An arm cinched around my torso, nearly sweeping me off the ground. You cannot just charge in there, Vaughn commanded, his voice firm in my ear, his grip constricting. Imprisoned by my own sudden need to save Caleb, I abandoned the plan and shoved against Vaughn's arm. I need to get him out, and we will, but we stick to the plan, he countered, his arm slipping from my waist when he felt my fight calm. His eyes met mine. It is your turn now. Clarity restored. I nodded and stepped forward, concentrating. I reached within, my body mapping out every droplet of water that surrounded us. I focused on the well, whispering to the water within, coaxing it to seep into the veins in the ground, sucking it down, lower and lower, until it was no longer of use, until the well ran dry, not a single drop left. And just as Vaughn had planned, the soldiers were forced to abandon the well and go outside of the barracks, to the river north of the camp, making them farther scattered apart and harder for the soldiers to keep track of. We'll keep them busy, Riker said as he raised his bow made of white flame. Vaughn's hand cupped my cheek tenderly. Stick to the shadows. My hand fell over his, determination knitting my brow. I will. Soren gave me a nod, signaling he was ready. I inhaled a deep breath. This was it.